Okay, so this is for any kids out there in their teens, early teens, ideally. It's something that something I'd like to talk to you about and give you some advice, and you can take it or leave it. So, and this is advice I gave my children, and I've given many kids over the years, and some have reacted very well to it, and some haven't. But actually, most have. And so I thought I'd do it in a more public way. So, first I'd like to point out or make you reflect upon the fact that we live in a really brutal world, right? Really brutal world, and you kind of it's pretty obvious that we do, but we don't really think about it. So, some of you, I doubt many of you, could have been born disabled, and that's the way you're going to live your life. You might find out you have some deadly disease and you're going to be dead in 6 months, and that happens to kids all the time, and they just die, right? There's kids out there, there's people out there in the world dying of hunger, there's women being raped, there's people being bombed, and it's a really brutal world out there, an unforgiving world, and you could die in a few months' time, and that's it, right? So really, I'm just kind of making sure you're relatively young. This message is supposed to be listened by those who are relatively young. So you're relatively young, and maybe you don't really appreciate that because you haven't really experienced it in your own life yet. You probably will at some point, but the world is really brutal, and the world as a whole doesn't care and may not care about your the problems that you may have. You might die a lonely, miserable death, and that's the way it is, right? No one will be there. Mummy won't be there to save you from that, right? Mummy won't be able to do anything for you. And so the reason I'm saying this is because I think many kids don't realize how brutal. When I say kids, I'm talking about young teenagers, really, which is who I'm addressing this to. So many kids don't realize how brutal this world is, and how how this brutality of this life, how they're about to go through a very brutal part of their life, right? Yeah. So, and I'll tell you why it's a very brutal part of. You're going through you're going through a time of your life which has brutal consequences. So, let me explain that. It doesn't make sense. None of that makes sense at the moment, but it will do in a second. So what's going to happen over the next few years, through your exams and whatever, is that in all probability, it will have an impact with you for the rest of your life. And most kids, and I've looked at studies before, I can't give any numbers, but maybe Google it if you want, but most kids, once they grow up, regret later on in their life that they didn't study as hard as they should have or could have. The vast majority of adults wish they had studied harder at school, or at school, at university, and that's if they're honest. Most people don't want to admit they've done something wrong, but most adults do, and by then it's too late. And this is kind of where I'm talking about this kind of brutal world, that then it's too late and there's basically nothing you can do about it. Now, yes, there's always hope. By the way, you don't have, there's many ways of success, but I'm just looking at my own friends at school, who I know, who I've kept in touch with, and pretty much, unless their parents have been really, really wealthy, it's actually those that have either wealthy parents or have done well academically are pretty much those that have done well financially in their life. So I went to an all-boys school, so I'm talking about boys only. So what's going to happen in all likelihood, is that you're going to be in a position in a few years' time where you are going to regret that you didn't study hard enough, and by then it's too late. And I think the thing that I'm talking about, the brutality, and let me just explain that a little bit further. I think the reality is, in this world, that people will judge you, and I think most people don't realize this. Maybe adults don't realize this, but people will judge you and your intelligence. I said really your intelligence, and you will judge your intelligence based on how you do in your exams over the next few years. And that is, to be honest, completely stupid, right? But it is the world that we live in. And my own example is that when I was, I basically failed to get into a school at 7+. So I went to a posh school for failures, basically. So I went to that school. My brother went to a really good school. I didn't get into his school. And basically, most people assumed, that because I didn't go to that school, that, I was like, not particularly smart, right? It's when I got my A-levels and then got into Oxford, I experienced, like, firsthand the massive change in the perspective people had, on me, right? So everyone assumed that I was intelligent, right? Super intelligent. And had I just, everyone, it's like literally everyone around me just suddenly assumed I was intelligent. So once I got to Oxford, that's it for the rest of my life. And here's the other thing. So I'm getting close to 50, right? And to this day, 30 years after, well, almost 30 years after, almost 30 years after I last sat an exam, right? An academic exam, people still base their perception of my intelligence of something that happened 30 years ago, which was a large part simply down to hard work. Now, I think everyone says this, that studying is all about hard work, and if you work really hard, you can do really well, which is, I think, basically true to some extent, right? I think studying, to me, if someone gets a really good grade, to me, that's not a sign. That's a sign of intelligence, but it's more of a sign of like stability in their background and hard work. Hard work is the biggest thing. Yet 30 years after I've done any exam, and everyone thinks I'm super intelligent, I must be intelligent, my kids are intelligent because they're my kids, because of some exams I did 30 years ago. And I think had I failed those exams, 30 years on, everyone would have been thinking I'm stupid because of those exams. And that is the brutal world we live in. And I think the other part of this brutality is that, and this is the bit which is really brutal, that all of this happens when you're a teenager, right? So I kind of went down a good path and did my exams well, basically aced my A-levels, and it paid off for me. But if you flunked your A-levels because, you got involved in something else, you weren't interested, you had other interests in life, and, I can see studying is, I think, on the whole, for most people, boring. I found it boring for the most part. And if you got distracted or just had did badly in your exams, whatever, this isn't your you're a teenager, right? You don't even know what you want in life. You kind of don't even know why you're studying to some extent. And you're basically, you've potentially ruined your life. And you basically, there are exceptions. There's many exceptions. There's always hope, by the way. But that's basically what you've done. And that is brutal, right? It is unfair. It's completely unfair just because you're 15, 16, 17. You've been maybe misguided by friends, maybe by your parents, by whoever. You flunked up your exams. And now you're paying a price 30, 40, I'm at 30 now, but 30 years on, but 40, 50 years on. And that is just so frigging brutal and unfair, but it is life. And I just think that, I just think it's so important that you realize this, and if you realize it, maybe it's a bit fair. If you know that you're screwing up your life and you do it knowingly, it's a bit more kind of, and this is why I send this message out to so many kids, right? So if you know you're going to screw things, if you deliberately mess up your life, knowing it's going to mess up your life, and you're fully aware of it, perhaps to some extent you deserve it. But I think most kids don't realize what they're actually doing. Now, yes, there's many routes of success. If you're watching this and you've flunked up your exams, there still is hope. But I'm giving you the probabilistic kind of result. The result is those, and I mean, Google it, look for statistics, but basically those that do well in their GCSEs, their exams, I don't know where this is going to be viewed, but those that do well in their exams in their teens go on to have far, far, far more successful lives than those that don't. And I don't know, I think many of you will be thinking that it's all about, if you think that it's all about intelligence, I can tell you it's absolutely not. I genuinely know stupid people. When I say stupid, I mean like they're almost certainly, I think, less intelligent than average people who have gone to the very, very best universities in the world. Basically, they've had great parents and they've just worked really, really hard. I know lots of people like that, and I know the most intelligent people that I know, some of the most intelligent people I know, have not done very well in their academic studies, right? There is, I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that intelligence is not fixed, right? If it is, it's not fixed at all. The brain is like a muscle, and with enough training, someone who's relatively stupid, can do amazingly well in their exams if they just keep studying and studying and studying. It's because not only do they study that material and know it really well, but their brain becomes fundamentally better. Yep. And as long as they study in the right ways and there's techniques and whatever, that's very important to learn. But if someone puts in that time and they put in enough time, even someone relatively dim can do very, very well in their studies. And so the advice I give a lot of kids, I just tell them, look, so this is a totally brutal world. The actions that you're doing now will probably impact you for the rest of your life. To the extent it is so ridiculously unfair, but that's a fact. I still leverage the fact that I went to Oxford almost 30 years, 28, 27 years after I graduated. And I think I'll still leverage it in another 10, 20 years. I've leveraged it all my freaking life. When I walk into, when people know about me, find out about me, oh, he went to Oxford, he must be intelligent. That's not the case, by the way. You might think it's the case. It's not the case that just because someone went to a top university, they're intelligent. Yes, they're not completely stupid, usually. And there are people who are almost completely stupid that go to these best universities. But yeah, it really has this impact throughout the whole of your life. So yes, you can do well without academic study, but do you want to? I mean, you've got one life here that you're trying to sort out, and do you really want to risk? I mean, the more you screw things up in life, the less options you have. And if I could go back, I don't have regrets really in terms of my teens, in terms of academic study. But I think the one thing I'd advise you is, just basically work your butt off in your teens, right? Because these are really the defining years of your life, more defining than any other period of your life, right? And there's no period in your life that defines your life nearly as much as your teens do, in terms of your academic study, right? Because in general, and this is your life that you're playing with, so you don't want to be screwing the statistics in a way that don't suit you. But basically, if you mess this up, you are likely to mess up your whole life. And so you want to keep as many options, even if you want to be a YouTube star or a pop star or whatever, there's no harm in you having the options of doing whatever you want to do. And the other part of this, sorry, I'm going to go on a bit, but the other thing is that as you go through your career, the more things you can't do, the more you'll want to do them. So if you mess up your grades and now you can't become a doctor, that's something that you'll want even more. And even like 10, 20 years down the line, you might be wishing you became that doctor, and just partly because you couldn't become that doctor. I'm so blessed. I feel so blessed. I've chosen every single career that I've wanted to go into. To be honest, I don't think I could have gone into certain careers because they didn't suit my brain. I wasn't intelligent in those areas. But saying that, I mean, had I worked hard enough, I think I could have done any degree in, and got, done well in any degree, because I believe I would have just like studied hard and improved my brain in those areas, expanded my mind. But I have zero regrets in terms of my studies, because I've had the ability to do whatever I wanted. But the more doors you close, the more regrets you're going to have, and you couldn't do this career, and you couldn't do that career. It's just going to like haunt you for years to come. So you're going through the crunch time in your life. This is make or break, and I sincerely advise you to put in as much time as you can into your studies, do as well as you can, and if you flunk up your GCSEs or your A-levels, you should be able to say, look, I couldn't have done much better, and that's the best I could do. And if you do that, you're not going to have any regrets. So even if you can't become your doctor or whatever, and if you couldn't do it, then whatever career that you wanted to do, you basically won't have that regret. So if you like give 100%, you get 3, whatever, you mess up your exams, maybe you got nervous or whatever. Okay, at least you've got no regret. You couldn't have done anything. And another thing is, I think this is really important, that you want at this kind of formation time of your life, you want to be able to look at the mirror you want to be able to look at yourself and see your achievements and and be inspired by your own achievements. So just to give you one example, or I can give you 2 actually, but they're kind of similar. So when I applied to Oxford, I got rejected. I applied for maths, got rejected. And honestly, I was devastated, right? To me, that was everything at that time. Yeah. So I got rejected. And to this day, I think, okay, got rejected. I absolutely aced my A-levels. I know so many people that have kind of like given up, who are just as desperate as me, who have been rejected and kind of like gone down a really negative spiral. Nope, but I did amazingly well in my A-levels, reapplied, held my nerve, and got into Oxford when I applied again a year later, this time for physics. And I look back at that in my own life, even like, I can't remember the last time I did it, but when I'm in any difficult time, I think back to myself and think, I did it back then. I kind of like came back from a rejection and managed to make it a success. And I kind of like, there's other occasions as well. I was like a year before I was going to, I kind of flunked around my degree for the first 2 years. And at Oxford, you can't do that, right? Because everyone pretty much works very hard. And I didn't. I wasn't up to much. I was kind of like playing a lot of squash and just got bored of studying, really. I don't really know what I spent my time. I didn't do anything too dodgy or fishy, but I just kind of like didn't want to study. So in my 3rd year, I was basically heading towards a complete and utter failure in that, I was going to, the exams at Oxford are all in, you're assessed for your whole degree in your 3rd year in 5 papers and consecutive work days. So I think it was a Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 3-hour papers where in each paper you just answer 4 questions. And that's it. Your whole degree, your 3-year degree is assessed on that. So basically a year, kind of like, actually not even a year, 9 months or so before the exams, I was literally heading to I basically even skipped the kind of like the internal papers that they do. They call, I forgot what they're called. So I skipped them. So I didn't do any. No one really cares at university. You can kind of like get away with these things, or they did back then anyway. And basically 9 months, I worked my butt off. I worked literally, I would say. Physics is really mentally demanding, so you can't work beyond a certain number of hours, or I couldn't anyway. But I think I must have worked from 5 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. till about 7 p.m. every day for 9 months. That was as much as I could do, and I got a good university grade at the end of the day. And I look back at that, and that to me is kind of like I inspire myself. I look at myself to this day and think, look, I did that then, and when I'm facing challenges today, I think I can do that now. And I think, you know what, it's so important for you to do this in this exam. You don't want to be looking at yourself in your early 20s and think, oh my God, I did those exams and I flunked them up, and I'm probably going to flunk up whatever I'm doing next. You need to kind of like build that that track record of success, not only for your future employers, but for yourself, for your own kind of like confidence. So just to kind of recap this very sobering message, and it is sad, because it's, what's going to happen. You're going to go through your teens, and after that, it is tough luck. You can't really go back. You can, in theory, you can go back. You can do your GCSE or whatever exams there are. You can do them again. You can probably still go to university and go to the best universities. But I don't know anyone who's done it. And that's partly because once you're defeated at that you've been defeated by these exams in your teens, and now you think they're impossible and whatever, you're not going to, in your early 20s, go back and do them again, because you're already mentally defeated. And it kind of brings that back, my point about you inspiring yourself. You've already uninspired yourself, and you're not going to go back. So, sorry, going on a bit, I suppose you can stop listening anytime you want. But I mean, with my own kids, I kind of like, they did really, really well in their exams, homeschooled. So like, for example, just one example, my son did his A-level physics. He got an A in that, not an A star, but an A when he was, I believe, 11, maybe even 10, but I think it was 11. And that, for him, like, it's like he's not that smart. He's not stupid, but he's good at, he has a natural aptitude for physics. He hasn't got a natural aptitude for everything else. I think he's very similar to me in terms of like his kind of mental abilities, which means he's not that smart, unfortunately. To him, all he did was work really, really hard, did lots of past papers and whatever. And it's like it boosts his confidence. And the reason I did that, I wanted him to do it, was because I knew that if he did that, people would think for the rest of his life he's intelligent. And it works. I mean, everyone thinks he's super intelligent. And sadly, we live in this, almost, I'd say, this crazy world, this kind of like stupid world, where everyone says that it's all about exams, all about hard work and whatever. Yet everyone thinks at the same time, kind of contradictory to that people are the kind of like, everyone likes to label you. You flunk up your exams, and that's how people are going to label you, and you're going to label yourself. And I just, it's a really, really, really brutal world out there. You're going to be labeled for the rest of your life based on what you do. You're going to set yourself up or break yourself. This is make or break in your life. These teenage years are make or break in your life. And I so strongly advise you to do your best to make them. And the way you do that, the principle is you firstly realize how important these years are. That's the first one. And then you work damn hard. And I would say, broadly speaking, the harder you work, the better. Look, I don't think life is made for hard work. I don't say you should work hard all your life. I would in fact advise you probably to bum around at university and have a great time. I think, do I regret doing that? Not really, actually, because I got a good grade. I didn't get a first class degree, but I got a 2-1, which is the next best thing, which was, by the way, it's a lot harder back then than it is today. Firsts are much easier, honestly, they are, than in my day. But at the end of the day, You don't have to work hard all your life. But I think, in my opinion, if there's one frigging period that you should work hard, it's those teenage years. So I would suggest, ideally, almost like to the point you almost give up everything, depending on how you're doing. If you're going to if you're cruising your exams, I guess you don't need to do much more. But if you're not, you should really do as well as you possibly can. And if that means 12, 13 hours a day, which is probably not possible, you're probably not going to do it. You've got school as well, and that actually interrupts things. But basically, you get the message, right? My advice to you, is work as hard as you can, do as well as you can, work smart as well, by the way. But you tend to work smart when you work hard. So if you're working hard, and you will go and find ways of working smart, right? It's quite important to do that. And that's another bit of advice I just give, is that make sure you do work smart, right? It's not all about hours. There are techniques. I think there's no point me giving those techniques. I don't know all the techniques. They'll be on YouTube. I think there'll be loads of people who have done phenomenally well that tell you on YouTube how they've done it. Go and study them. But that is part of the hard work, right? The hard work is looking at, it's you finding out all these things. So if you are in your teenage years, I'm sorry that you're in the situation you're in. I genuinely feel sorry for you. It's like you've got this massive burden. You are defining your life, and I wish you very well.